From teleporting a huge ship to using a cell phone in 1928, here are the 11 most mysterious cases of time travel. Number 11. Andrew Carlssin. Andrew Carlssin was a self-proclaimed time traveler who got busted for insider trading. When an unknown trader on Wall Street turned his $800 investment into $350 million in just 2 weeks, the SEC immediately got involved. Carlssin made 126 high-risk trades that profited every single time. He was arrested in 2003 and investigated by the FBI. Carlssin greatly surprised the investigators with what he had to say in his defense. He claimed that he was actually from the future, the year 2256. He said that he had come here with a time machine and offered to give the FBI the location of Osama bin Laden, the exact date of the invasion of Iraq, as well as the cure for AIDS in exchange for leniency in his trial. He had chosen to come back to this time because of the volatile financial markets. Carlssin would not disclose the location of the machine because there was too much fear that the time machine could end up in the wrong hands and cause total annihilation. There was no record of his existence anywhere prior to the year 2002, and Carlssin was released on bail. Soon after, he disappeared and was never heard from again. This story was printed in the Weekly World News, which was famous for being a sensational, fictional magazine. However, the story continues to be circulated, and many people wonder, who was Andrew Carlssin? Number 10. Airfield from the future. In 1935, Air Marshal Robert Victor Goddard was on his way to inspect an airfield in Edinburgh. After finishing his task, Goddard went back in his plane, but the weather was so bad that he couldn't get very far, and he had to return to the airfield and make a forced landing. But as Goddard was approaching the airstrip, he witnessed something from another world. All of a sudden, the clouds dispersed and the sun was shining bright. In the airfield, Goddard saw 4 yellow airplanes on the ground with mechanics around them. One of those 4 planes was completely new to Goddard, and he couldn't recognize the model. Keep in mind that this man was a trained Air Force officer, so it was practically impossible for him not to recognize an airplane model. Goddard couldn't believe it. He thought he was hallucinating and considered the occurrence a mirage. However, when he came back to the same airfield 4 years later, he saw those exact 4 yellow planes with mechanics running around them. And he was also able to recognize the 4th plane. It was a Miles Magister. It was first made in 1937, 2 years after Goddard had witnessed the supernatural occurrence. Had Goddard had a vision of the future? Number 9. Time-traveling hipster. Perhaps the most famous image that went viral was the picture of a man dressed like a hipster surrounded by people who are much more formally dressed. He doesn't seem to fit in at all. This photo is considered an authentic photo of a reopening of the South Fork Bridge in British Columbia. It was claimed that there is no way that someone wearing a hoodie, a printed t-shirt, and sunglasses belongs in the 1940s. If you take a closer look, you could argue the man is wearing a sweater with a sewn-on emblem, and that style of glasses have existed since the 1920s. In any case, he looks much more informal than everyone else, and there is much debate as to whether this actually is a time traveler or if the picture has been photoshopped in any way. Number 8. Mysterious air raid. When Joachim Brandt, a photographer, and J. Bernard Hutton, a journalist, were sent to write a story about the Hamburg shipyard, all of a sudden bombs started falling from the sky. The 2 men were completely caught off guard, and they started running away from the area in a panic, but they also managed to take a couple of photos during their escape. Once they were far away from the incident in the center of Hamburg, they tried to tell people what had happened, but no one wanted to believe them. After all, if there had been an air raid, someone would have heard all the noise, but there was nothing. Determined to convince people their story was true, Brandt and Hutton took the photos they had made and developed them, hoping to prove they indeed had experienced a dreadful event. To their surprise and shock, there was nothing on the developed photos, as if the air raid had never happened. When Hutton was reading a newspaper some 11 years later, he saw an article about Operation Gomorrah, which was a code name for an air raid on Hamburg in 1943. And the photos of the air raid looked just like those Hutton and Brandt had tried to take in 1932. Number 7. Policeman in a time warp. In July of 1996, a policeman named Frank and his wife Carol were shopping in Liverpool. They decided to split up and go in 2 separate shops. Carol went into a bookshop and her husband went to a music shop. As Frank was slowly walking away from the place where he and his wife had split up, he noticed how everything had gotten quiet. All the noise of an urban city had gone, and it was very peaceful. When Frank started looking around, he noticed that the houses, the shops, and the people looked different, as if it wasn't the present day. Everyone was dressed like they were from the 1950s. Frank was both confused and frightened and decided to go back to the bookstore and find his wife. To his surprise, the bookstore was gone. In the place of the bookstore, there was Cripps, a woman's clothes shop. He just couldn't believe it. He knew that that was where the bookshop was supposed to be, and so he decided to enter the clothes shop. But the minute Frank walked through the door of the clothes shop, he found himself in the bookshop and back to his normal life. Number 6. The passenger from Taured. In 1954, a man wanted to enter Japan, but he had some problems at customs. Apparently, the man had his passport with him, but he couldn't enter because the passport came from a country that no one had heard of. The man claimed to be from a country called Taured, and he said that it was located between France and Spain. The customs officials were confused because the only country that existed in the region between France and Spain was Andorra. They opened a map and showed Andorra to the man, asking him if that was the country he came from. The man was completely insulted by this. He said that the location on the map was correct, but the name of the country is wrong. It's Taured, and it had existed for more than 1,000 years, and he never even heard of some country named Andorra. The man was given a hotel room to spend the night there until officials investigated the problem. And although they placed a guard in front of his room, the strange man from Taured was gone in the morning, along with his passport. Is this possibly a parallel universe or an urban legend? And now for number 5, but first, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on the latest videos. Number 5. Two couples. This happened in 1979 when two married couples were traveling through France. They were driving when they realized it was getting dark, so they decided to find a hotel and stay there for the night. When they finally found one, it looked very unique, and the cost of staying for the night was just 19 francs. Compared to 200 francs, which was the average price at the time, this seemed like the ultimate bargain. When the two couples were having breakfast the next morning, they saw two policemen in old-fashioned uniforms. But since they were the police, they didn't ask any questions to avoid looking suspicious. A few years later, they wanted to visit the same hotel again, but they couldn't find it. The location of the hotel was completely empty, without a trace of any building. And when the four people researched those police uniforms, they found out that those uniforms had been the exact design for the French police, but in 1905. Number 4. The Philadelphia Experiment Survivor. The Philadelphia Experiment is an event that took place in the autumn of 1943 when the ship USS Eldridge was allegedly teleported from Pennsylvania to Virginia after it was made invisible. Of course, there is very little chance that this event ever happened because there is no evidence of it whatsoever. The whole operation was probably a military attempt to disguise the ship and make it invisible to radar, but not physically teleport it. However, a man named Alfred Bielek claimed that the Philadelphia experiment actually did take place and that he was the only survivor. According to Bielek, he was born in 1916 as Ed Cameron. He was recruited in 1940 for a secret government project, and then he was sent to outer space, where aliens interrogated him and then decided to return him to Earth, but back in time. He was sent back to 1927 as a 1-year-old child named Al Bielek. So he managed to blend two things into one, to be both a time traveler and an interstellar passenger. Number 3. The Man from Laxaria. In 1850, a man was found in Germany in a town near Frankfurt. The man was named Jofar Voren, and he spoke broken German. He was a stranger in the town because no one could recognize him. When he was taken to the mayor's office to be questioned, he claimed to have come from a country named Laxaria, and that it was located in the region of Sakaria. The man couldn't understand any other European language, but he could read and write the languages he called Laxarian and Abramian. He also claimed that his country practiced some form of Christianity and that it was very far away from Europe, separated by huge oceans. When presented with the maps of the world, Voren was completely shocked. He couldn't recognize a single part of the world, and thus there was no way of knowing where his homeland was. Many people argued that he must have come from a parallel universe. Number 2. Moberly-Jourdain Incident. In 1901, Charlotte Ann Moberly and Eleanor Jourdain, two professors from Oxford, England, were visiting the famous Palace of Versailles, the royal home of French kings, until 1792. The last queen to have lived in Versailles was Queen Marie Antoinette before she was executed. When the two professors were walking around the grounds to the Palace of Trianon, they started seeing men and women dressed in 18th century clothing and hearing phantom sounds. They began speaking to people in Old French and seeing things as if they were doing them from memory. Somehow they felt like they were in a time loop, and they remembered crossing bridges and climbing staircases that no longer existed. Chaos was everywhere, and they were there when a page came to warn Marie Antoinette before the revolutionaries came. They wrote a book called An Adventure describing the event in full detail, and they published it in 1911. The events the two professors witnessed remains a mystery, and the book was highly ridiculed. Number 1. 1920s cell phone. Another famous image comes from bonus material in Charlie Chaplin's film The Circus from 1928. At one point, a woman, or a man dressed like a woman, walks by and it looks like she's holding a cell phone up to her ear. The video clip can be found on YouTube and of course went viral. The Irish filmmaker analyzing the film said that the only conclusion was that it had to be a time traveler from the future. Now, the most popular theory to explain this image is that she's holding an early hearing aid, technology that was just being developed around that time. Otherwise, who else would she be talking to? It's not like there were other people with a cell phone. You can decide for yourself, of course. Thanks for watching. Remember to subscribe before you leave, and I'll see you soon. Bye!